Okay. That's an oldie but goodie there, Sarah. Hey, we're gonna dive in. Who here has ever been pulled over by the police? Anybody? I got pulled over the other day. Pulled over the other day, and the policeman comes to the window and says, "Quote, I must have been his first speeding victim because he said, I quote, I've been waiting on you all day." To which I responded, "I got here as fast as I could." He told me to have a good day and stay buckled up and left. So I don't know if that works every time, but in that case, it worked, okay? So, yeah, in that case, it worked. We're going to dive in with session 10 this evening. I heard someone say, well, is there going to be a test? There's a lot of blanks for you to fill in. I just want to try to, so let's open up with a word of prayer, all right? Father, we indeed are grateful that you have created us in your image, that you have given us the responsibility of being your image bearers. No better way for us to do that than to be found in Christ. So, Father, as we represent you, I pray that you would be honored. I pray that you would give us courage where ours falters. Give us strength where ours fails. And, Father, remind us of the purpose for which we have been created, and that is to bring you glory. And may that be seen in how we love your word, how we love your things, and how we love people. And it's in Christ I pray. Amen. Okay, we are going to talk about ballots over bullets. Okay? We just came through about 7+ months ago, almost 8 months ago. We just came through a presidential transition, right? Y'all remember that? The peaceful transfer of power is most important among presidential candidates. And most every candidate, as they run, they talk about that in the campaign. Unlike a king who is asserting that he is the sovereign, now we've had a say, we've had a vote. The vote's been certified, and it is what it is. And so that's that. And change occurs. So, ballots rather than bullets. Of course, the Declaration of Independence asserts that government is legitimate only when the people consent to it. And there are occasions where it doesn't go the way we want it to go. You feel me? Okay. We have a great example of this in the election of 1800. The election of 1800 is where I want us to go this evening, and I want to. We'll look at some other stuff, but here's what Washington said about transfer of power. He said, what is most important of this grand experiment, and don't forget, this is still a grand experiment. First of all, it's tried nowhere else in the whole world. We've been operating under a constitutional republic, as a constitutional republic, just a little over 230 years, 234 years, 35 come this year. Washington says, what is most important of this grand experiment of the United States? Not the election of the first president, that's a piece of cake, but the election of its second president. The peaceful transition of power is what will separate this country from every other country in the world. Lincoln comes along and says this right before shots are fired at Sumter, looking back over his shoulder at what we have established, and he says ballots are the rightful and peaceful successors of bullets. And that when ballots have fairly and constitutionally decided, there can be no successful appeal back to bullets. Right? That's why it's supremely important for us to protect the integrity of your voice. And that's why we should be involved. And that's why we should ask questions. Not to contravene anything, but just to be in the know. For us to be aware. For us to be informed. So let's talk about what led us to this place where we're talking about votes and not violence and ballots as opposed to bullets. How did we get here? Well, let's stop for a moment or two and let's talk for a little bit about the Revolutionary War. All right? Let's talk about the urgency of it, and let's also talk some about the ridiculousness of it as well. The urgency of it is indicative because of the abuse, the neglect, the disdain that's being perpetrated on the people on this continent, that we are left basically as orphans. We are left as the money bag, because I mean here on the North American continent there is all kind of natural resources, timber like you can't imagine, and the fish that are on the shoals on our coasts are amazing. If it hadn't been for the fish of New England, Great Britain would have starved because they had overfished their fisheries. So the urgency of people being neglected, and then also the ridiculousness of what transpires. You have a ragtag bunch of people. You have George Washington, who's going to be in charge of the whole shooting match, and all he has ever known militarily is failure. He was there with Braddock in the French and Indian War. He was at Fort Necessity. He was here, he was there, and everywhere he was, I mean, he finds no successes whatsoever. As a matter of fact, when Burgoyne and Clinton and some of the other generals from Great Britain found out that he's in charge, they're like, man, this is going to be a cakewalk. He's never led a huge body of soldiers. Congress is not paying their soldiers. They're not feeding them. They're not clothing them. There's all kinds of ridiculous stuff that's going on. And then ridiculous of ridiculous, they pull off some coup and they wind up winning. Right? They pull this rabbit out of their hat and they wind up winning. Now the urgency becomes to establish the parameters of how we're going to govern ourselves. The Articles of Confederation have been written, debated, challenged, and passed in Philadelphia in 1776, that summer after the Declaration of Independence. It's finally not ratified until 1781. The war's pretty near over by this time, where it's ratified. After the Revolutionary War is done, then we find there are those that want to rid themselves of the Articles of Confederation. Some folks like it. Take, for example, two of the states that had a real difficult time in passing the original Articles, passing the Constitution. Who do you think, if you think of states that would have been kind of dragging their feet a little bit on ratifying the Constitution, what states would you think they might be? One of them is a real tiny, tiny little state. Rhode Island is one of them. New York is one of them. Massachusetts wasn't very far behind. But Rhode Island, New York, you would have thought, oh, it was North Carolina, South Carolina because of, the slavery issue, the question, but they had put that to bed. You have any idea why Rhode Island would be against ratification of the U.S. Constitution? Not necessarily. Think about dollars and cents. Sadly, a lot of people will vote their pocketbook before they will vote their beliefs. I would much rather be a little less well off and be in right standing than to be well off and wonder, why in the world did we get here? Rhode Island, New York, what can you tell me about? Where are those states located? They're on the coast. And what might they have on the coast? Trade. Let's talk about ports. So, New York Harbor is huge. Rhode Island has great harbors as well. Massachusetts is right behind the harbor of Boston. So, whoever controls the trade now does what? Little tiny Rhode Island now becomes, hey, you want something, it's got to come through us. Because what's happening under the Articles of Confederation is states begin to assert themselves, their sovereignty, which is cool, sovereignty of the state I believe in, but to the exclusion of other states. So if you want something from Rhode Island and we happen to be in Virginia, for example, how far does it have to go if it doesn't come by ocean to get to you? Well, you can count the states, right? From Rhode Island to New York or Connecticut, New York, and all the way down. And what if each one of those states stopped and charged a tariff for everything coming and going? All right? One of the things you've heard is that's being floated out there. And some of these ideas get floated just to see how we'll respond to it. There's the idea being floated right now that we're not going to be allowed to travel from state to state unless you can prove what? That you have a COVID-19 vaccine. Any thoughts on that? My only question is, please refer to the Constitution of the United States of America, because there is no prohibition for interstate commerce. You can't do that. The reason I ask the question is so that we'll go, oh, well, maybe that makes sense. No, I'm going up north. I don't care what you do to me. I have grandkids to see. And it'd be different if it was the bubonic plague, all right? I'd approach it totally different. We're talking about a virus. And I know it's dangerous. I know some folks have had it really bad. I know some people have died, and it breaks my heart. I hate it. But it's a virus. It's a virus. Speaking of which, do you know the CDC says that in the course of COVID, that includes all of 2020, and 7 months, this came out in July, 7 months of 2021, there are 460 children under 18 that have died of COVID. 4 million cases have been studied. 461 have died. In 2008, the winter of 2018 and 19, so there'll be there were 11 million cases of the flu. Over 600 children died. No measures taken. Just saying. Now, I'm not denying the veracity of anything. I'm just saying, ask some questions. How can that be? Why were there no measures taken? I remember doing a youth retreat the winter of 2019. We had about half as many children as we normally do for it. And I started asking the kids, where's your friends? All sick with the flu. So I got to looking around, and several of the schools, Meigs and Southern over there in Meigs County, and even up here, Morgan and Fort Fry and Waterford, the highest percentage was Southern Local. They had 52% of their children out of school with the flu. Did schools close? No. Were there any steps taken to augment it? No. So I'm just saying, question some stuff. Ask for detail. Ask for information. But anyway, back to the Articles of Confederation issue, and Madison writes a pretty good piece in 1787, and he entitled it "The Vices of the Political System of the United States." When he writes this, it's almost as if he is lamenting the fact and the abuse that we are heaping up on one another, and how we are not getting along, and how we are using every opportunity we can to get a leg up without any concern for the whole. Now, if any of y'all that have known me any length of time and all know that I am a pretty independent sort. I don't like being told what to do. I really don't. But if it's for the welfare of the whole, I can go along to get along. There are things I like to do, but there are also things I know are expedient for the welfare of the whole. And for that seed that we call the United States of America today, from that seed that was planted in the Declaration of Independence, and that is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the whole contingency of this grand experiment that we're doing. And so Madison, and he lists 10 complaints in this, and I'd encourage you to take some time to read that, and even before the ratification of our great Constitution. So let me ask you this. How long did the American Revolution last? What numbers are you using? 8 years? So when are we going to start? I'm going to write it down. 75. 75 plus 8 is what? So I got 1775 to 1783. Does anyone else want to buy? All right, let me give you my timeline. I'm going to start 1763. That's when it really started. Now, let me tell you why. You know what happened in the period from 1754 to 1763? It's called the 7 Years' War. It's better known to us as the French and Indian War. So at the conclusion of that, and the reason I say this is because this really is when Great Britain starts to meddle in our business. This is when the abuse really gets turned up. I'm going to show you this because just to get back to the point of why it's ballots and not bullets. Now, I know officially the history books say yes, 1775, Lexington Green and Concord. Okay, I'm good with that. In 1783, yes, that's when the Treaty of Paris was signed. But I think, for my sake, I want to go back to 1763. At the conclusion of the French and Indian War, France cedes all possessions east of the Mississippi to Great Britain. And so what the British government decides to do, because when you look at that, I mean, you can look at it on Google Earth or on a map, right? Do you see the vast resources that are available between New England and Missouri? Man, the breadbasket of the Midwest and the forests that are throughout, the great riches that are available to there. So what England decides to do is they decide to impose new taxes on its American colonies in order to pay for that war. All right? Kind of sounds like what we've grown up with the great military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about. So I'm going to start here, 1763, at the conclusion of the French and Indian War. 1765 is the Stamp Act, where England says all legal writs, all newspapers, advertisements that is, ships, bills of lading, etc., 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 are now we're going to levy a tax on it. We're going to increase revenue. Now remember, the purpose of a government is not to generate revenue. Now I realize that it needs revenue to operate. I'm not against that at all. I love roads, bridges. I like those type of things. Some of the services that we get are great, and it does require money. But the first responsibility of a government is to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right? It's to protect, not to levy taxation. So, 1765 is the Stamp Act. What's the next one? Y'all remember? How about the Townshends Acts? There are 4 of those that British Parliament passed in an attempt to assert what it considered to be its historic right to exert authority over the colonies through suspending of legislatures that just won't get with the program. Is that not listed in one of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence? You've shut down houses of legislatures. You've removed judges. You're hauling us across the seas for adjudications, not among our peers. And then, of course, they ratcheted it up through collection of revenue duties. Okay? So you got the Stamp Act, then there's the Townshends Acts. What happens in 1770 in that conservative, patriotical bastion of Boston, Massachusetts? Can you imagine that being said today? That Boston, Massachusetts is the epicenter of everything patriotic. Well, it was then. What happened in 1770 in Boston? There is the Crown has basically imposed martial law in the city. And there's a squabble that pops up. Imagine that. There's a squabble that pops up from it, and the detachment was, according to the official report, felt threatened by the mob. Shots were fired. No one knows who shot first. 5 people were killed on the Boston Square. One of them being a free slave, a freeman. All right? That happens in 1770. It's kind of ratcheting it up a little bit, right? 1773, you've all heard of the Boston Tea Party, right? Where there's a protest, not just on tax or tea, but monopolies. Where do you get your tea from? If you're going to drink tea, where do you get your tea from? From Jeff Bezos, right? Where do you get your tea from in 1773? East India Company. That's the only place you get it from. You don't buy it from no place else. It's the only tea there is. Right? I suppose if I were to ask you, there'd be some Louisiana fans here. There'd probably be some Lipton fans here. I don't know. You can get tea whatever you want. You can buy Aldi tea, as far as I care. I do on occasion. It's pretty good tea at my house. And I'm satisfied when I've saved $3 a container. But that's me. All right? So they're protesting both a tax on tea and the monopoly of the East India Company, and a party of Bostonians just veilly dressed up as Indians boarded ships, and they estimate somewhere about 10,000 pounds worth of tea is thrown into the harbor. Right? So I'm saying from 1763 is when the conflict started. Have you noticed how it takes politicians a while to catch up to reality a lot of times? Same in the 18th century. Same in the 18th century. And it's not changed in the 21st century. That's why we keep the pressure on. All right? 1774, four intolerable, what we call the intolerable acts. So in retaliation to the colonial resistance, particularly up in New England, Parliament enacted four measures. They got the Boston Port Act, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details of it. If you want to go find about it, you can read it. The Massachusetts Government Act, the Administration of Justice Act, and the Quartering Act. Quartering Act is most definitely mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, right? You run us out of our own homes. You eat our food so that you can quarter your soldiers in our own homes. The other acts are mentioned too. Now, this becomes 1774. Does that ring in your ear? You know what else happens in 1774? Representatives from the 13 colonies decide, whoa, that's enough. No more. We're going to get together and we're going to start talking about this. So in 1774, in September of 1774, and October, September 5th and October 26th, the various colonies, various states, used the Intolerable Acts as justification for convening the First Continental Congress to sit and start talking about these things. All right? Moving forward. What happens in 1775? Well, lots of stuff is happening in 1775. I'm telling you all this just so that we can go back in a couple minutes and reaffirm why ballots are preferred to bullets and votes to violence. Okay? 1775, Patrick Henry gives a famous speech in a Richmond church. And he says, what? Yeah, you don't know the last portion of it. He says, I know not for what course others may take. Does not matter what others take. But from what I'm seeing, give me liberty or give me death. Unless there's a 0.2% chance I can die. No, it's not what he says at all. He's of the opinion that war is inevitable, and so he is trying to encourage his state to equip with money and personnel to fight against the British. That's 1775. March, okay, spring. In April, and this is basically where we pick up most times in our books. In April 1775, can anyone still remember the poem of Paul Revere's Ride? I can get it started and I get lost. I just haven't. I need to go back and rehearse that. April 18th and 19th is where Paul Revere and his companions ride in the battles of Lexington and Concord. The British hear word that there's an arsenal, an armory up in Concord, and so they dispatch 700 regulars to that. They're intercepted along the way by, it's under 100. Some articles in books have said there was 90 or 80, but the majority of them say there's under 70. So they were on their way to Concord, and they get interrupted at Lexington Green. Again, no one knows who fired the first shot, but we get it started off. And then the regulars move on up to Concord, and they're met by hundreds of what's in militiamen or minutemen, and basically get thrashed pretty good. The numbers, total losses, according to British reports, at Lexington and Concord is 273 compared to that of the Americans of 90 at both of those conflicts. So things are ratcheting up more, right? Staying in 1775, Lexington and Concord is April. So in June 17th, is the Battle of what's called Bunker Hill. Actually, it's not Bunker Hill at all. What is it? It's Breed's Hill, all right? The English have control of Boston, and what the Americans have done is they've gone across the river into Charlestown and have taken the heights and are threatening the city and the harbor. Well, the Brits don't like that, so they're going to want to retake it. So eventually, with a little over 2,000 men, they clear the hill. The cost of about 40% casualty rate of their assault force. So it just steeled the vigor and the morale of the Americans. So that's in June. Turning the page to 1776 is where Thomas Paine writes a pamphlet, a 50-page pamphlet, entitled what? Common Sense, right? See, up to this point, there's still a lot of discussion about whether we're English or whether we're American. Is this an internal squabble? Will we get things ironed out with the king? Can we iron things out with the king? We should iron things out with the king on the one hand. On the other hand, it's like, nope, it's gone too far. He's pushed us too far. He's asking too much. He has crossed the line. Well, along comes a fellow by the name of Thomas Paine, pours gasoline on the fire with his pamphlet, and over 100,000 copies are sold just within a few short weeks. And what that does is that paves the road for the Declaration of Independence to be written, debated, and ratified. So in my opinion, Paine really kicked things off. So from January 1776 to July of 1776, where we get to the 4th of July, right? Where on the 2nd, actually, Congress voted for independence from England. And then they take, why politicians do this, I don't know. But they take a couple extra days and adopt the articles and we say we're a nation. It's no longer an internal strife. It's not a civil war that's going on. We're going to be our own separate country. And we declare that. All right? That's in July. In September of that same year, on the 21st of September, as a matter of fact, Captain Nathan Hale was captured by British. And on the 22nd, without a trial, he was hanged. For treason and for being a spy. I get it. And what's Nathan Hale's famous line? The only regret I have is I only have but one life to give for my country. All right, so that's September. So let's see what happens in December. What happens in between September and December? Washington gets routed. He gets pushed out of New York City, across New Jersey, and he's across the Delaware River, and it looks like it's all lost. We're in big trouble. Not going to happen. Enlistments are running out, food is short, ammunition is short, morale's at an all-time low. Washington on Christmas night crosses the Delaware River, surprising that garrison of Hessians at Trenton, and takes almost 9,000 prisoners. All right? And then he follows up with that with a victory at Princeton on the 3rd of January of 1777. And that kind of gives a little bit of fire to the belly, if you will. All right? You see some of the ridiculousness that's going on here, as well as the urgency that's being at struggle. Let's go to 1777. In the fall, October of 1777, after a horrendous summer, General Burgoyne captures Fort Ticonderoga, which is a pretty strategic place, on the 5th of July. But in a stunning series of events, he loses at Bennington, Vermont in August, and Bemis Heights in October in New York, coming to the middle of October where he has to surrender Fort Saratoga. And some of the men that were involved in that ordeal, amazing stories to go and read. So that's 1777. What do we know happens in the winter of 1777 through summer 1778? Well, that's the winter at Valley Forge. Not just the winter at Valley Forge, but he's there till June. And because what happens? We get licked at Brandywine, we get licked at Germantown, and it looks like it's going to fall apart again. But Washington gathers up about 11,000 regulars and took up quarters just about as far as it is from here to Marietta, 22 miles. And there, his decimated, disease-ridden, near-starving soldiers, in one of the worst winters we've had in ever, they make it through. And when the army comes out on the other side, they become a little more efficient as a fighting force. Still looking pretty dark. In 1778, we get a little bit of a break. Now, France has, from 1776, has secretly been sending munitions and armaments and money under the table. But in 1778, the United States and France form a real alliance, and they begin preparing fleets and armies to enter the fight. But they don't declare war on Great Britain until June of 1778. So they take a few months to get some things in order so they're prepared. All right? 1779 is the John Paul Jones incident. Where does John Paul Jones go up against the Seraphists? It's off the coast of England. And this battle was waging, and it looks like it's not going well for John Paul Jones. And even in the midst of that struggle, his great byline is what? You think it's bad now, you just wait till I start fighting. Basically, I've not yet begun to fight. Things didn't turn out real good for his ship. He did not surrender. He eventually loses his ship, but he wins that conflict. Again, stealing the resolve of what's going on. Then 1780, we get hit in the gut again. One of America's greatest heroes decides to become a turncoat. Who am I talking about? You've read this. Benedict Arnold, that's right. In 1780, he decides that he wants to, come on, Benedict, grow up a little bit. A little bit entitled, in my opinion, but of course, we don't see any entitlement today, right? There's no entitlement today whatsoever. So he decides to cut a deal with the British that he's going to leave the door open at West Point. What's at West Point today? Does anyone know? United States Military Academy at West Point on the Hudson River. And he's wanting to leave that bastion open so the Brits can come and take it. And if he takes it, we split the colonies in half and it's done. So his treachery comes to the awares of Washington and others. Washington is heartbroken about it. And, of course, Arnold takes sanctuary with the British. That's 1780, September 1780. See how quickly these things change? Finally, March 1, 1781, the Articles of Confederation are finally ratified. As I say on the screen there, served as a bridge between the initial government by the Continental Congress written between 1776 1777 and adopted that fall. But from November of 77 to March of 81, took that long to ratify. All right? And then, 1781, the highlight of 1781 is what? What do you think the highlight of 1781? What England does is they turn their attention from the north and the east, and they head to the south, and they are having all kinds of success. Except for a little bit of trouble they had at Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina. A bunch of mountain fellows got together and give them a pretty good licking down in that way. But let's talk about October 1781. And I mentioned this before. If you ever have opportunity, go there. Read anything you can about Yorktown, the people involved, and then go and walk it. Go and walk it. It'll leave you with chills down your spine when you think about what was accomplished there and how it was accomplished. So Cornwallis decides in March to set up a base there in Yorktown because it had a deep water port. So the Continental Army and the French Army, they're up north, New York way, Pennsylvania way, so they bring their entire army from up east and set up a siege line all around Yorktown, and Cornwallis finally capitulates on the 19th of that year. And for still conflicts that are going on the seas, but primarily on land, things settle down. And then 1783, the Treaty of Paris finally and forever ends that conflict. Britain recognizes the independence of the United States, generous boundaries, including the Mississippi River on the west. Britain keeps Canada. Does anybody care about that? Is that okay with you? I'm okay with that. Because all they got up there are mosquitoes as big as a bus and black flies. You can have it. So British keeps Canada, but ceded East and West Florida back to Spain. So why is the election of 1800 such a big deal? What is happening to you every day that you live? Are you getting older? Are you getting better as you get older? Or are you getting weaker as you get older? I don't know about you, I'm getting weak. And the recovery time is longer. Have you noticed that? You pull a muscle at 57, I'm telling you, you don't recover in a week or so. Bill Taylor's grandson, Dylan, he's got a pretty bad ankle there. And kid's still playing. I remember those days. But if that were me, I'd be done for the year. I'd be done for the year. So let's talk about a few facts about the election of 1800. I want to show you why it's so important. Fact number one. Who do you think that's a picture of? He dies in 1799. On December 14th, 1799. A man who has been present for the last quarter of a century, who's been a steady, sensible leadership, has died. So what happens in 1800? What happens in 1800 is actually the death of the Federalist Party. Because who's won the previous two elections? George Washington. I mean, he's extremely popular. He could have won a third one if he wanted to, but he went back to Mount Vernon. The reason the election of 1800 is such a big deal, first of all, Lincoln. Washington is dead. Okay? Here's fact number two. It is the first successful transfer of power. In 1796, Adams defeats Thomas Jefferson in a close election. And at this point, the president does not decide who his running mate is. Right? Could that be a danger? I mean, just imagine the election of 2020. If the second place guy wound up being the vice president, you think those two are going to get along? Probably not, right? So, 1796, Adams defeats Jefferson in a close election, and so Jefferson serves as Adams' vice president, but there's conflicting interests that arise between these two to the point that they dissolve their friendship. And they become competitors. As a matter of fact, Adams and Jefferson die on the same day, 4th of July, in 1826, just hours apart. Adams, on his deathbed, is quoted to have said, "And Jefferson remains." Well, he didn't know that Jefferson had died up previous to that. And so the election of 1800 becomes the first nasty public election. And I mean nasty. Some of the stuff that we hear pales in comparison to what they would say to and about the other. But what is amazing is that all of that banter and all of that bloviating ceases the moment, as Lincoln says, where those votes are certified constitutionally and fairly, it ceases. That's what makes us great. That's what makes this nation unlike any other. The third fact is in the election of 1800, Adams doesn't come in second, he comes in third. Adams comes in third place. Adams had some difficulty in his presidency. A lot of things that he wanted to do really don't take hold until after he's gone. Adams had some good ideas, but there were a lot of undercurrent. And rumor was that Adams favored a monarchy rather than a republic, which is the furthest thing from the truth. He never would have. And Adams and Alexander Hamilton can't see eye to eye. And Adams is accused of being an anti-federalist. And Hamilton, he found Hamilton to be repulsive. You ought to go read some of the things he wrote about him. It's just interesting to read. And so what Hamilton does, being the entrepreneur, he locates a man by the name of Aaron Burr who would support his agenda, so he promotes him. And Hamilton's a pretty rich kind of guy. So in the end, Adams comes in third to Jefferson and Burr, because Adams has stirred the pot against Jefferson too. So now we've got a log jam. We've got a tie vote when it comes down to it. So fact 4 is this: Aaron Burr was almost President of the United States of America. Now what happens is, most of Jefferson was a Democrat Republican. Imagine that. Most of them wanted Jefferson to be their candidate and Burr to be vice president. Just go along like we've started it and let's roll. Burr would have none of it. He wanted what was coming to him, and he dug his heels in. And so Hamilton, one of Jefferson's biggest detractors, launches this vicious letter campaign in which he now supports Jefferson and not Burr. Because Hamilton, and I believe rightly so, when comparing the two, when you compare Jefferson to Aaron Burr, it don't take you very long to figure out which one to pick. Hamilton believed that Jefferson was a man of high character, but wrong ideology, and Aaron Burr was a man devoid of, in his words, any character and not loyal to any ideology. Okay? To me, that's like saying, I didn't vote for that guy because of the way he tweets. Really? I'm not making any judgments here. I'm just saying, really? So at least Hamilton had some scruples. And so what happens is you got a split vote. You've got the Federalists on the one side, and you have the Democrat Republicans on the other side. And the Federalists changed their vote and voted Burr to be vice president. And what that would do is set into motion events that would lead to that infamous duel between Alexander Hamilton and Burr. That's what brought to that. Burr felt like he was slighted, did not get what was coming to him. He was bamboozled, if you will. And Alexander Hamilton's on a $10 bill. You probably don't think about Aaron Burr much unless you've been to Blennerhassett Island, right? That's really where he shows up. He indeed shows himself to be of a low character. So again, we're saved. Here's fact 5. You think voting in 2020 was a mess? Look at this mess in 1800. In 1800, the vote began in April and ended in October, because each state chose its own election day in 1800. So if they voted up north, South Carolina, by the way, was the last state to vote. See, each state could choose its own election in April. Aaron Burr has a successful campaign in mobilizing the vote in New York City in particularly, and succeeded in reversing the Federalist majority in the state legislature to provide decisive support for the Democratic-Republican ticket. That's what he does with his time. And so what happens, we get to the end of the vote, because South Carolina is the last state to report, and they chose 8 Democrat Republicans, and they finally tip it in favor to Jefferson and Burr, but we still got a 63-63 tie. So the reason the election of 1800 is so vital is that it changes the way we vote from here on forward. Because the elections of 1789 and 1792 had a flaw within them. As I mentioned, the president could not pick their own vice president. And the problem there that I see is I'm voting for the president, not for the vice president. Because if you, for example, in Washington and Adams, the loser actually gets to be the vice president. It happens in 2 elections. But what happens if your vice president has counter beliefs to yours? It could hurt the agenda of a sitting president, and if the president were to die, he'd be replaced by someone he did not select. It also showed serious flaws when Aaron Burr was able to draw Federalist support, since many Federalists hated Jefferson and wanted to hurt him by voting for Burr. And so, the election of 1800 escaped disaster, but the country understood that political parties were a reality, a necessary evil, has been said, and needed to be accepted, and that's where they ratified the 12th Amendment, setting the presidential elections. And so in 1804, the Federalists and the Democrat Republicans both created their own ticket, in which named their own presidential nominee and vice presidential nominee as they were nominated. So let me just show you real quick. Here's a picture of what the map looked like. You got a log jam at the top there, 73-73. Adams at 65. John Jay, really not included. So, let me bring us all the way back around. I say all that to say this. Why is your vote important? Why are ballots the rightful and peaceful successor to bullets? It's the only way, in Madison's view and others, but particularly Madison, it's the only way in order to sustain a free people. So, what's left to me to do? Because there's a lot of rhetoric out there. So what's left for me to do as a citizen, and not just any citizen, but as a Christian citizen, as a follower of Christ citizen? And I'll leave you with this one word from the Apostle Paul, where he says that we are to speak every man truth with his neighbor. Truth is supreme. And what is the underlying bedrock principle of the United States of America? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are endowed by their Creator and have certain unalienable rights. And among these, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Life is a right given by God. Liberty is a gift from God. Happiness, in other words, what you make out of your life, is a gift from God for you to be a steward. That's the truth. The truth isn't the government is here to provide, or to care, or to nurture, or to coddle you. The government is here to protect you from evildoers, to punish those evildoers, and to provide a common defense for all. That's what we agreed to. Now, it is up to us to go back and speak to our neighbors these truths, because our neighbors don't know them. Our children don't know them. And I dare say our grandchildren know these things. Speak the truth to them. You don't have to have veins popping out on your neck. You don't have to be ugly. You don't have to be rude. You don't have to be crude, coarse, or crass. You don't even have to cuss. Speak truth to your neighbors. And what does Jesus promise? He says, and I know the context, but I believe it applies not only to Christ followers, but can apply to a whole country. Jesus said, and I'll hush when I say this, in John 8:31, in verse 32. John 8:31, he says, "You are my disciples if you follow my teachings. If you follow my words." Everybody knows John 8:32, right? Jesus says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." Err on the side of truth. You're going to err at all. We pursue Christ. That's why we're free to do whatever we want. You're free to do whatever you want. You have boundaries because you know you want to honor your Creator. Just like in a country. We're free to do whatever we want. However, there are boundaries because there's a place where I end and where you begin. So my first vocation is to take care of self so that I can take care of you. So every man speak truth to his neighbor. Because if truth is not, and the reason this is becoming so difficult is because in 2021, everyone has their truth. Truth has been purported as something relative. It's not relative, it's relevant. Truth is truth no matter what. Men will never menstruate or lactate or give birth. Does not happen. Biologically, cannot happen. Right? So if that's reality, that's not relevant, that's not relativity, that's reality. You don't believe me? Try to get an egg from a rooster, or go ahead and milk yourself a bowl. See what you get. So, speak truth. Because ballots are more powerful than bullets, and votes are to be preferred over violence. But the only way that's going to continue to happen is if we stand and speak truth. All right? Well, I'll hush. We'll pray and I'll call it a day. How about that? Thank you, Father, for who you are. Thank you for giving us eyes to see and ears to hear and hearts to discern. Thank you for this country that you've given us. Thank you for the gift that she has been. Thank you for the responsibility you've given us to steward her direction. Give us courage. Give us wisdom. Give us insight. Father, give us creative ways to publish your truth, the truth, to our friends and neighbors. This is the grandest experiment on the planet. Thank you for the blessing, and thank you for all the good that has happened from this nation. I know we've got our scars and our wrinkles and our warts and untoward sections of our existence. But so does every life in this room. We dedicate each to you now, and it's through Christ I pray. Amen.